All right, I think we're live. Hi, Brian. Hello, everyone. Okay, just checking. We're live on YouTube, right? Okay, perfect. Awesome. All right, welcome, everyone. My name is Bella Bablumian. For those of you that haven't met me, I'm the founder of the Embody Wellness Institute, and the whole purpose of everything I do is to find and to bring knowledge, tools, and inspiration for us to really embrace the highest potential for living well. And I don't even like to call it wellness because I think being well is about the verb, right? Really actively seeking in every moment, in every present moment, seeking out what makes us feel good, what makes us feel healthy, well. And today's conversation is no different from this. So in my episodes, Real Health, I bring really interesting speakers, practitioners, and people who go beyond the definitions of what health could be or what well-being could be, should be, and seek their own answers and come up with their own solutions. And mostly we have been talking a lot about physical health and mental health, but relational health has also been a topic. And so today we're going to be exploring the topic of going beyond monogamy. Why we're going to do it? That's the whole discussion. Like why we would like to bring this topic to you, and why we would like to share this conversation with you. I think Brian and I will go into this in more detail. But what I want to say is that this has been in planning for many months, and it's really amazing that it fell on a day. Yesterday was the full moon in Gemini, which is all about telling our truths and breaking paradigms. And so here we are sharing our truths and breaking some paradigms. And it's a really important conversation for both of us from a individual perspective, but also from the perspective of really looking at the well-being of our society. I think, and this leads me into introducing Brian. Brian and I are both, I think last time we had a real conversation in person was like 15 years ago at Johns Hopkins at the School of Advanced International Studies. And we were probably not talking about monogamy or not monogamy. We were talking about, more like monetary policy. But 15 years later, I don't remember how it happened, but I think we were just like looking at each other's posts and really resonating what each of us had to say about not this topic, I think, but it was more about topics of, like dismantling patriarchy and looking at how our society is in some ways not working, all these different aspects of it. And so when I reached out to Brian and we had a conversation, it was so enlightening to see that we both are on the same page about many different topics. And this topic, non-monogamy, arose because it's something that it's a very intimate topic, but it's also a topic that's very much intertwined into everything else that we're gonna, everything else that are that we discuss. Brian at his building belongings, collaborative, and then he's been sharing a lot about many different topics, and so this topic is tightly intertwined with everything that he shares. And for me as well, it's a topic that very much relates to health and wellness, that what is Embody is about. So without much ado, I want to introduce Brian before we delve into this. I want to say that Brian is really someone that I really respect, because it's talking about dismantling patriarchy for women is kind of easy. We've been all talking about, empowering women, but to see a man that comes from, being a former diplomat and working in that world, and to really openly sharing how some things are just not working is really commendable. And I really appreciate that on both a personal as well as, for all of us. It's really important. Thanks, Brian. Brian is a mediator, a lifelong learner. He's a polyamorous parent of 2 children. He has a beautiful family. I've been following his family for years now. It's also very inspiring to see how you're raising your children. Again, he is now stewarding, I really encourage you to check it out, Building Belonging, a global effort to combat authoritarianism and co-create a world where everyone belongs. And today's conversation is exactly about that. Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself and share a little bit of your story of why non-monogamy, why, despite us, kind of being raised in this very traditional, like, follow this path, why did you decide to, go beyond? And what would you like to share with us? And also, please do a better job of introducing yourself if I missed something.
No. Yeah, thanks, Bella. And good to be here. It's fun. It's nice to finally have a chance to talk more publicly and share a bit about what's coming up for us. And yeah, let me reciprocate by saying how much I've appreciated following your work over the years, and how encouraging it is to me to find someone who comes out of, squarely kind of in dominant culture, bureaucratic society, World Bank, to open into these questions. I think it gives me courage and hope. And I really appreciated how much you've really committed to sharing your truth and doing so in a much more public way. I think my personal experience of it is it gives more permission to ask those questions myself and follow them. So I'm just grateful for that. Thanks for the introduction. I think I would just add, I live here in Southern Oregon in a small town on lands traditionally stewarded by the Shasta and Takelma people. And I think it's worth saying that for me, this exploration is deeply connected to everything I do and believe. So as Bella and I were kind of talking about the framing for this conversation, there's this question of like, well, I think there's an assumption in society this is a private thing. It's about our sex lives or intimate lives. And at some level, sure, that's true. We are talking about the erotic. At another level, it's about how we relate and how we be human and how we connect and how we think about society. And to me, my personal life and the choices I make in my parenting and my relationships feel inseparable from my professional life and the kind of work and community I'm trying to build and the kind of world I want to be part of. So I think for most people, there's a pretty bright line between those worlds. And for me, there just isn't. And so as I try to raise my kids without coercion, I'm also trying to relate, to my wife and partners without coercion. And it's super hard because, those grooves that we grew up in are quite deep and it's easy to get pulled back in. But I wonder, Bella, if you'd be open, it'd be helpful to me as we kind of center in the space to share a bit about your intentions for how you want to show up today and what feels important in terms of like having this conversation. And I'd love to do the same just to help stay accountable to, the kind of discussion we want to have.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, the importance of this conversation and the intention behind this is really to be open, vulnerable, and in that help others be open and vulnerable. I think that's really a key that's missing in a lot of our conversations. So I think this openness and vulnerability is what I want to put out there as my intention for today.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. That's also my top intention. So hopefully we can help each other. My little, I have this comfort device here. It's a little,
I love that.
little stuffy giraffe, which is kind of like helps me tap into my more vulnerable self. Sort of like a contrast to my shirt here, which is more of a professional statement. The three things I wanted to add in addition to kind of staying open and vulnerable and grounded is just to acknowledge that everything I speak to is going to be my own experience, which is informed by my positionality. And so in this world and navigating non-monogamy, I present this way. I'm white, I'm red as male-bodied. I have a more complicated relationship to gender, which I'm happy to unpack if of interest. I have class privilege. I'm quite large. You can't see all of me, but I'm 6'4", 200 pounds. I come in a body that is socially sanctioned. I have a more of a normative physical presentation that our society celebrates. And I have couples privilege in the context of non-monogamy. I'm married and have children. And so all of those aspects of who I am and how I am read and received socially influence my experience. And so I think that's just really important to name. I also want to say that I intend to, and this is hard for me because I often tend to universalize my values, but I want to be clear to the extent possible where I have a value that is universal. For example, I think everyone should choose the relationships they want, should act from agency and choice and freedom. And that is something I believe everyone should do. I have a normative perspective on that. And then what specific relationship structure you might want, whether it's monogamy or non-monogamy or something else, is up to you, right? There's no right answer to that. And so I feel conviction about the value and great openness as to the expression of that value. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I would say very important. We have no agendas in this conversation. The agenda is to just share, and there are no right answers.
I actually have one agenda here, Bella, just to be clear.
We don't claim to have all the right answers. We just want to share some things that have felt right for us, and actually the truth. This leads me to what I wanted to share about. I think in every aspect of what who we are and what we are about, it's all a spectrum, right? The moment we say we identify as something, we start seeking something else that we should incorporate into this identity. And so for me, even gender identities sometimes are it's so great that we're having this conversation about all the new different gender identities but I think also I think in the future we're going to hopefully go into the place where we can be whatever we want to be without having to define to anyone who we are or justify anything that we're doing, and that relates not just to our sexual identity but also to the way that we relate, which there's an intimate connection between those. But I'll turn over to you again. So yeah, I think you shared your intention, but I would love to hear from you, kind of what were the first steps and why you considered venturing out of the standards and the norms that we see. I come from a very traditional society. You said, that you shared about who you are, kind of who you are seen as by the society. In my case, it's very different, but also, comes with a lot of different, a lot of different rules that come with who I am, right? I'm Armenian. I come from a very traditional society. I'm a woman. I have certain looks that also imply certain things to certain people. And so in a sense, all of those things, they put us in they almost make us like puppets, right? That we have to act in a certain way because we are the way that we are and because of the families we're born to and the societies we're born to, right? And so I think both you and I, we kind of followed what was expected of us for a number of years. And then, what happened? Let's start there. What happened? I had no idea that you were on this kind of similar path, very different, but also similar. And then I'll share it. I think that we'll start with that. How about that?
I love that question. I feel it's like, why are you who you are is a good question to try to wrestle with. Yeah, I think my experience, kind of like my story of self from childhood and beyond, is that fundamental contradiction where, like, at one level, I'm moving through the world, jumping through the hoops that are set in front of me, climbing the escalators and the various ladders, and doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. And so if you're watching me from the outside, it feels like, yep, that guy's just doing the thing. And my internal experience was very different. While I jumped through the hoops, I was often, even as a young kid, like asking, like, why is this hoop here? Like, I didn't put it here. Why should I jump? Why are we doing this? So I was always very curious. And I think that was informed in part by a sense that the society actually didn't work for me. And as I've been unpacking that in recent years around understanding patriarchy and other systems of oppression, it was this kind of radical idea that two things are true. On the one hand, this society was built by and for people who look like me. On the other hand, there's an assumption that because that is true, that the system works for people who look like me. And my experience was it doesn't. It didn't. I don't want to be part of a white supremacist patriarchy. And obviously I didn't have language for that as a kid, but I knew that, for example, being boisterous and kind of following masculine stereotypes was easy and rewarded. But being emotional and seeking introspection or places to connect more deeply was not okay in the body that I come in. And I rejected that. Like I rebelled against kind of that, the boxes I was put into, but didn't have a lot of social support for that inquiry, right? Like people were not, there were not a lot of safe containers as a kid, adolescent, even adult, to be an emotionally expressive person in this body. It sort of doesn't compute. So all that to say that non-monogamy for me feels like part of what I've been doing my whole life, which is questioning these paradigms, feeling in my body that they don't fit, but not seeing a lot of social support for that inquiry. And ultimately, when I left my last kind of salaried role at a large philanthropic institution, it was because I couldn't tolerate anymore not seeing my questions reflected back to me. So it was 2016, it's the Trump primary, it's Black Lives Matter is having a resurgence. And I would go to work with mostly other white folks and ask about, this is the most significant movement of our times. What do you think about it? And just not hear that question shared. There was no space for that. So to me, the inquiry into the kinds of relationships I want and what feels truer to me in my body is a natural expression of all these other kind of counter-normative paths and inquiries I've been in my whole life. And I think what was particularly hard for me, it's maybe the bigger surprise is it took me this long because I've been holding these questions. I wrote a post recently, which maybe we can share back with folks, where I remember that when I was 14, when I first landed the idea that monogamy didn't make any sense to me. So I've been thinking this for 27 years, and yet it took me this long to really formally make that decision to break with monogamy and to pursue a different path. So to me, there's just both those questions are interesting. One is, why did I do this countercultural thing? Like everyone else is swimming downstream. Why am I swimming upstream? And in myself, it's also a question of I've been swimming upstream my whole life. How come I haven't acknowledged that fact and really embraced it? And I think for me, last two things I'll offer here, and then I'd love to hear kind of your own journey upstream, I knew what was true for me, but I had a really hard time centering myself because I was acutely aware or afraid of the impact it would have on others around me. My family, right? I was raised Catholic. I was a terrible, terrible Catholic. So I knew they wouldn't be here for it. My wife, I was afraid would be impacted by this choice. Questions about my kids, it was scary to acknowledge what felt true to me. And so a lot of the work that I had to do to get to this place of being able to speak my truth in a deeper way, which is a work in progress, to be clear, is allowing myself to center what felt true. And I'll just name that for me, in society that centers what white men want, because I've rejected that model my whole life, it's really hard to center what I want and to believe I had a right to it, and sort of distinguish my own deepest needs from the kind of white male entitlement that I reject was and is just really hard. But let me pause there and ask you, Bella, how did you go from being this sweet, traditional Armenian young lady into the person that you are today?
Are you saying I'm not sweet?
I self-censored what I was going to say, but I'll let you fill it in.
It's for me it was a slightly different journey, but I also like you, ever since I was a child I just asked way too many questions. Maybe it's a Gemini thing too, I don't know. It's why, just it's a never ending. And when I started studying what I really want to do, I've done just about everything from psychology to then international development, and one of the reasons I never really stopped at one thing is because none of the disciplines really gave me the right answers, and my deepest question is exactly what I shared in the beginning, what are the conditions and what are the ways for us to enable us to really pursue our well-being, really give us those tools. And and I felt like, and then with my practice of, many years later, when I started Embody Wellness, it was also the reason for that was because I didn't find the answers in public health. I didn't find the answers in psychology. I didn't find the answers in other practices that I studied, from personal training, nutrition, to you name it. I've done it, like, to some spiritual, esoteric practices. And when I set out to create what became my own method, which I call the sensefulness method, was because it's like there were all these models that these, in psychology, like if you identify these symptoms, then it's this, right? And then public health, and it's very black and white, right? And so when I delved into it, like I put my career on hold, or actually, decided I was not going to do any of that anymore, was because I wanted to find my own answers and share it with my, people who became my clients. And the more I, and then I compiled what I called, my methodology now. But it's really interesting. The more I work on myself and work with people, the more I realize that it's not really anything that, sure, we need to change certain ways in which we do, in which, like, how we eat, how we sleep, how we exercise, and all of that. But a lot of the ways and practices that make us healthy and well are actually go in big conflict with the way that our society is set up. And it just keeps coming up all the time with all of my clients, that are like, oh, well, why don't you do this and this? And then you realize that there's our society doesn't enable us to pursue our happiness. We don't have enough time. For example, the greatest things we can do is, like, spend time in nature and in sunlight. And, during sunlight time, we are in an office and in front of a computer, sitting on a desk. And, you start questioning that, like, why do we really have to do those things? And inevitably, eventually, the questioning got to the relationships too, especially when, on a personal level, I went through a couple of relationships that were working very well, except, after a while, the sexuality part wasn't really working anymore. And then my first reaction was like, wait, there's something wrong with me. That was the first questioning, right? Like, maybe I'm not attractive anymore. Maybe sometimes I'm doing something wrong. And then you start blaming the guy. And then, there's just, like, a lot of, it's heavy, right? Because when you love someone and something is not working, you try to find what the culprits and what the reasons are. And then from that phase, I went on to study, delve into all different kinds of studies, from, to understand the history of all of this, the history of monogamy and the psychology of it. And, and it's very interesting because you start discovering that maybe monogamy is not even as natural as we think that it is. I'm not to make any judgments here, but a lot of the, like, for example, one of the books that really influenced me back in the day, I think we've shared that you read it too, is, like, Sex at Dawn. It really looks at monogamy from a historical, social, psychological perspective, and it just comes to the conclusion that, I encourage you to do your own research to find out. But and then when you look at that history of how we weren't really monogamous for most of our history, and then how our other species that are very related to us are not. And then you pair that with things like, the staggering rates of divorce and problems in relationships, cheating that's going on, that's reflected in some of these new apps that are booming because they're, kind of feeding off of that. You start asking, like, okay, this model is what we accept as the regular and the normal and the standard model. It's not, doesn't seem to be working that well, right? And is it natural for us, really? And then you kind of find yourself in the beginning, you find yourself in that either or choice, like, it's very black and white. So I either stick to this model and I give up on my sexuality, because you also realize there's something very important about, and this is a completely different discussion, but if you understand sexuality not as just a 5-minute intercourse that most average people have, that's very dissatisfying for most people involved, you realize that sexuality is the whole energy behind it, and in the esoteric and as in Eastern traditions, it's considered like the source of our vital energy. It's our life force, right? And so when you start looking at sexuality from that perspective, you can't just say like, oh, that aspect of my relationship is not really working, and so I'm just gonna this is what I hear from a lot of my clients, people who I don't end up signing. It's because they're like, oh, that's not really important for me, right? And while those specific 5 minutes of might not be as important, but the whole spectrum of sexuality is extremely important, not just for our identity, but for our health and well-being, and for the relational aspect. And so going back, you find yourself in this choice point, like either I give up on that and just kind of get satisfied with something that's very dissatisfactory. I give up on my sexual exploration. I give up on the satisfaction, and in some couples it's mediocre, in some couples it's non-existent, in some couples it's okay, right? But it's most couples after a certain number of years, they run into the same problem inevitably. And then on the other spectrum, you have to break the whole thing apart, and then you go into this singlehood, you separate, and then all of a sudden it becomes okay for you to be exploring your sexuality and having different partners. And that just didn't really sit well with me. I'm like, well, why is it that I have to destroy one thing to go into, what I mean? It's like you start questioning that, and then when you start having these conversations, when you start reading more books, and there are not that many of them, but there are some great books about this too. But you realize that there is this whole gray zone that we're not discussing and we're not sharing, and we are, even if it is happening, it's happening no one talks about it. And there's some parts of our society where this conversation is totally normal, but most are in most places it's not. And that creates for a lot of misinformation. So people suffer a lot because they don't know they can do this. They don't know what to do. They do it in incorrect ways, or they break things up because they think that's the only way, or they never even get married, or they never go into relationships because they're afraid of that structure. Mm-hmm. So I find that my desire to share this, and I'm so happy to find someone that that has so much knowledge about this. Sharing is power, right? Like it's for us to take these tools and study them and learn, and then make our own decisions. I've come a full circle. Like I'm not sure what I want anymore. And sometimes it's a cyclical thing. There's some phases in our life where we want to explore and have active sexual life, and we want to be with different people. And there are other times when you want to be deeply intimate with just one person, and none of those are incorrect. And the whole point is that if we make it so black and white, we end up strangling that vital force and that exploration and our ability to be authentic. I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I'm resonating for sure. Yeah, I think the black and white point is so key, because I think for most folks, I would suspect most humans, neither option feels great. And when we're stuck in a binary, it just feels really paralyzing, because in your heart of hearts that I don't want that. I also don't want that. Then what? Am I the weirdo? And so learning to see binaries as spectrums instead, I think creates so much more possibility. And I think it's interesting that, one of the hangups, and I think this affects people socialized male and socialized female in the opposite ends of this binary, is this false trade-off between independence, what men are socialized into. We don't need anybody. We're good. Over here, I'm a rock. And then codependence, what women are socialized into, you need a man, you need to be with somebody, you need to be of service to others, this kind of really self-sacrificing model. And they both suck, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants either of those things, whatever your gender. And I think for me, one of my frustrations with our culture, and I'm here speaking for American culture, white American culture, we just don't have language for it. The word interdependence is what I strive for, which is I want to be connected to myself and connected to you because I'm not a sociopath and I care about you. Why is that so hard? why is it so hard to sort of simultaneously be in connection to myself and the other? And we don't have enough language for that aspiration. And so I'm socialized to be independent, need no one. You're socialized to, need someone and be connected. We both don't get the skills we need to actually have relationships. And then you're cast out, into life and dating without any real support in how to be both a fully, integrated human. None of us got those skills in school. And then how to be in a relationship. Like we're not taught anywhere with any sort of structure about how to be a good relational being. I think that's really hard. I guess I wanted to pitch back a question. I think it's interesting, and I want to distinguish between, I think you and I both came to the inquiry around different types of ways of relating through an exploration of sexuality and the erotic. And I've come to distinguish those things. Like I think there's our relationship to sexuality, which one can perfectly well explore inside of monogamy. It's about your own relationship to yourself and what turns you on and how you want to connect sexually with others, or not. Asexuality is also a thing, and that's perfectly fine. And then there's how do you want to relate to other humans? What forms of intimacy feel alive and connective? And initially I conflated those things because, like you, the erotic feels really important to me as part of what it means to be fully human. And it's been a slow learning to realize that while that is true for me, it's not true for everyone. There are some people who are asexual, who don't feel a need for erotic or sexual connection, and yet still feel a deep desire to connect to other humans. Like that is what it means to be human. And so anyway, I just want to distinguish between those two things, right? Like open relating ways of connecting and forming intimacy, and then the exploration of the eroticism and sexuality. And my understanding is that both of us, that has been connected. I just want to be curious to hear how your journey into understanding your own sexuality and the erotic, and then how that intersected with your exploration of non-monogamy.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. For me, I think in one of my first relationship, when things didn't work out because of sexuality, I started questioning that. And then I said, my next relationship, I'm not going into closed monogamy because it obviously doesn't work, right? So I already went in with that ultimatum, kind of I can't do that because I know that, and also if you study, I love I don't know if you guys are watching or if you watched Esther Perel. She's amazing when she because we in our relationships we expect the incompatible, right? We want this stability and dependability, and we want to make sure that we're forever together. And at the same time, we want the desire and the thrill and the excitement. And unfortunately, they don't really go hand in hand. Not to say that monogamy is not, monogamy is completely possible and doable, but it's you have to really find that happy medium where you can have that door slightly open, or you don't have that way to control a relationship, to keep the aliveness there. And so that's what I decided to do in my second relationship. I didn't know if I wanted to go into the whole realm of open relationships or polyamory or whatever, but I just knew that I could not have that door fully closed, because it killed, to me, I understood very clearly now that it's if I close myself off to sexuality, looking at other people, my sexuality is closed off for anyone. It's all or nothing thing. It's you can't just be a loving person, towards one person and then be a hater towards others. It's an all-encompassing energy. And so I found myself I want that energy to be alive and boiling, and there are risks involved in that, risks. But at the same time, that felt really right. And so, I went into this with that in mind, and it worked very well in the beginning, because just the fact that it's a very mental thing, right? Just the fact that I knew that I had the option, and I wasn't stuck with just one person for the rest of my life, like that already made things different. And and then now we go into a whole spectrum, right? And then I've kind of explored some of the different aspects of open relationships, and there's so many different options. I think this is a conversation you and I could offer to have if people are interested in like learning about what's out there and what's possible, right? From having an open relationship where you can have something happen with another person sporadically, right? Or you can have on the completely other side of the spectrum, and this is what I would like for you to share, is you actually have concurrent relationships with 2 or more people, right? So there's a whole wide range of things. And for me, I think it was really about leaving that all the possibilities open, and at the same time allowing for my primary relationship to deepen through that. Because I think that the more honest we are with our primary partners, the more we understand that we're human beings, and we can't, this like control is not the right mechanism. I think the more we become the more real we become with each other, the more attraction there is, the more love there is, because it's like you can be vulnerable with each other. While a lot of people choose to behind the, like cheating is more acceptable than open relationships, if you think about it. Like, it's crazy, right? So it's okay to do it and not tell anyone, and it's like you're lying to everyone, but it's not okay to share. And I think it's the opposite. It's like that vulnerability and openness actually opens doors for you to have much deeper connections both in your primary and non-primary relationships. So what about you? Like, what was right for you? Did you know immediately kind of what you were seeking outside of the monogamy? Was it something that was it through research, or was it through how did you actually? I just want the people who are there are a lot of people that have this questioning, like, oh, something is not working. Where do I seek these answers? Like, where do I start looking, and how do I even know what I want? And how did that exploration start for you?
Yeah, so I'm a big nerd. I love reading and listening to podcasts. And I guess I'll say there were 2 different tracks, right? The sexuality track and then the non-monogamy or kind of open relating track. And I was listening to a podcast when I was 36, about 5 years ago, about Black masculinity. And there's these 2 men, and one of them asked the other, what makes you feel sexy? And I was like, I'm 36 years old. I've been, in a number of relationships in my life. I've been married for, at that point, 11, 12 years. I don't know. I do not have an answer to that question, which felt silly to me and kind of ridiculous that I'm such an intentional person in so many areas of my life, parenting and professionally, and I like to understand topics and this very fundamental, very basic thing about myself. It's not about, any partner or anything, just what makes me feel sexy in my body. I couldn't answer. And it bothered me. And it bothered me that I had made it 36 years on the planet without even being invited or supported in how to answer that question. And I think part of my own pushback against dominant culture norms is this very hetero patriarchal notion of desire and connection and eroticism that says, men take from women, and never related to that. So I pushed back against it. And my kind of orientation towards being a good lover, a good partner, was about being of service and about centering my partner's needs. And so even the idea of sinking deeply into what I want was incredibly hard. I went on an intentional journey. And for me, as a very brainy person, that looked like a lot of reading, a lot of podcasts, a lot of exploration.
Sometimes that's the hardest question, right? Like, what do I really want?
How do you know, right?
Yeah. Most people don't know the answer. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's been a slow journey. I would say, like, I have some concrete offerings for folks. I'd say one of the first things we have to do is get back in our bodies, because we live such profoundly disembodied lives. And it's hard, and there's not a lot of space or support for it. And for a lot of folks, it's super scary. Like, if, a lot of us have been victims of trauma in different ways, and to be in our body is not a safe place to be. But also you can't really experience pleasure or truly be, open to real intimacy if you can't be in your body. And despite being like a lifelong athlete who paid deep attention to my body, I spent very little time paying attention to what's going on inside of me. So that's been a huge piece of the learning as well. So I think for me, it was, I'll put it this way. There's a tool called the Wheel of Consent, which I totally love. And I won't go all the way into it now, but basically Betty Martin in the book called The Wheel of Consent, and in her tool, distinguishes between 4 different skill sets: giving, receiving, taking, and and when I thought about those 4 skill sets and actually sat down with them, I was like, wow, like, I'm pretty bad at all of these, despite considering myself a pretty relationally attuned person. And I incorrectly assumed that receiving would not be that hard for me. But it turns out that receiving requires A, knowing what you want, which for most of us is incredibly hard. B, asking for that thing from somebody else, which is incredibly vulnerable. And it affects us differently, right? If I'm a man, I'm not supposed to ask because that feels vulnerable. I'm just supposed to take. And if you're a woman, you have no right to ask because your needs aren't as important as the man. So what are you even doing? So then you have to ask, and you actually have to receive it when it's offered to you, and actually relax into the joy of that receiving. And I guess I'll offer one more thing here to kind of jump from the erotic to the relational, kind of the non-monogamy piece. Is it belatedly occurred to me only, since opening my marriage, that for me, like, I think so much of what people seek in monogamy, not necessarily super intentionally, is safety, sense of security, a sense of commitment. And we know intellectually at some level that, like, most marriages end in divorce. A lot of them aren't happy. There's lots of cheating. So we know that, but we still hold on to this illusion of security. And it occurred to me that for me, I found monogamy profoundly unsafe. And the reason is my wounding as like a large, white, male-bodied, male-presenting person is that I don't trust people to be honest with me because systems of oppression put me in a position of power over. And so it is not a lot of people who come in different bodies that don't look like me don't have a trusted felt experience of embodied safety with someone that looks like me, which means that if they say yes to me, I don't know, or it's hard for me to trust. Are they saying yes because that's their centered, deepest, authentic truth, or because they're kind of going along to get along and they have to say yes because they're afraid of what happens if they say no? And so for me, monogamy, it's hard for me to feel truly loved and chosen inside of that structure because I'm always wondering, like, is she really here for me, or just because, like, we made this vow so long ago and she feels like she has to? And non-monogamy, when my partners have not just the ability, but are actively encouraged to choose to be with whomever they want and to form whatever kinds of relationships feel good for them, the fact that they choose me alongside whomever else they may be with feels awesome, feels amazing. I can relax into that. And ultimately, like, if they choose not to be with me, I will be both heartbroken, and I want that for them, right? Like, I don't want people to stay with me out of pity or tolerance or anything other than like full desire. And I think that is an appropriately high bar. It requires that we work, and that's scary. But also,
Yeah, I really relate to that because it's it's the same for me. Like, in relationships, I don't trust necessarily what people tell me, but what make me feel. And I want to go back to what you said also about the body, which I think is extremely important. Because this is in body, I talk about the body a lot, but because I think this really pertains to this conversation in a very important way. We've learned to kind of trust and understand our world through a reason, right? Through the mind. And the reason our society was structured in a certain way and works in a certain way is because it's It's all through reasoning and through the mind, right? And in doing that, we've slowly disconnected. I don't know if slowly or immediately. I don't know, but we've been completely disconnected from our body, and we've been told, especially in the more quote unquote civilized societies, that our body needs are below our whatever we decide that are kind of a higher level needs, right? Like what our society needs from us and what our goals are to reach the professional life and what the relationships require of us. And so we have completely like suppressed our needs as, I don't want to say animal needs, but some of the animal needs too. Like our body is, animalistic and it has certain needs, and for example, in Ayurveda, they say that you can't suppress any of your, like sneezing and coughing. Like that's, if you suppress something for long enough, it will somehow show itself in another way. And I truly believe that the suppression that we put on the body has created all the range of all these like mental health issues.
Bella, can I interject?
Yeah, of course.
I wonder if you're open to it, if you're willing to speak really just personally to like, I agree with you, of course, at a societal level. And I'm just curious if you'd speak to like how that showed up for you, like in the society you were raised in, and like what pressures did you feel? Like, yeah, how did that land in you and your body?
Oh God, so many of them. I mean, even as a woman, you're constantly
Not you, Bella. I mean, I understood in the I.
me. Well, like I was raised. I have very liberal and very like parents that would never tell me what I had to do. So I'm really lucky that I had that freedom. But it was, somehow it still sneaks up in very indirect ways of like, what are certain rules of behavior? Like you shouldn't wear that dress because it makes you look too whatever curvy, or you look a certain way. So it's a lot of it is about looks, right? Like if you look a certain way, then you are going to attract unnecessary attention, and that could be dangerous, right? Like that's one thing, that's one message that oh, you're like, I would get this a lot, right? Oh, you're like flirting with him, like he's gonna get ideas. And in reality, I was just being myself. I was just being the friendly self. And then after a while, I started, filtering that. And like I said, when you start filtering those natural expressions of who you are, eventually you lose that energy, right? So I found myself, like again, around the same age, maybe that's the age where you start questioning, like 35, 36. And I was just like, you feel dull. Like I just felt dull and like unenergized. And I was like living in Rio, and I was like, wait a second. Where are all the good looking men? And like, is there anyone finding me attractive anymore? This is it? And then in a way you're like, well, maybe this is it. Maybe, at 30, 36, 37, I should be content with just having a really loving husband and a beautiful child and, a career or a business, whatever. Like I should be content with this, right? But it just felt black and white, And I was really incredibly like lucky because I had started my company, and I was inviting all these like amazing practitioners to just and they would come out of nowhere, right? It was just crazy. And one of them I just invited, and we started doing this course on activating your sexual energy. And I was just administering the courses, right? I was like, and I wasn't actually participating, but of course I started like doing, it's like all breathing exercises and visualizations and whatever. 4 months later, I wake up and I'm like, wait a second, something has changed. It was bizarre. It was like, like it was someone like as if someone had turned a switch on from the off position. I just like I was feeling that energy circulating through me, and I was like, wow, this is what I was missing. And it's not just about sex and sexuality. It's the source of creativity. It's the source of like the vital energy, like in the actual energy, health. It relates to everything. That's why in in the Eastern religions, it's considered your source. It's like the Kundalini, right? It's where your energy originates. If you kill it for everything, right?
Mm.
And so I think going back to your question, for me, it was really about that this sexuality, femininity, being too attractive, being too flirty has to be toned down and has to be controlled. And it's no wonder that in our society we have like all these references to the witchcraft, and it's dangerous, the burning witches, and the serpent who is that's the original sin. All of that is a reference to the fear that we have of the female sexuality and this. And then maybe the same thing could relate to men, because feminine energy is not just about women, right? It's about our reconnection to that energy. But yeah, that was a big one for me.
Mm. Yeah, you're making me think of in my family, we've worked on clarifying and differentiating between jealousy and envy and compersion. And compersion is a term that it's not really popular, not really understood in dominant culture, but it basically is the opposite of jealousy. It's the idea of taking pleasure or happiness in somebody else's pleasure or happiness. And it kind of emerges out of the polyamorous community. And I realized that there's something very interesting that happens where, so the definitions I'll offer is compersion is happiness at somebody else's good fortune. Mm-hmm. Envy is wanting what someone else has, and therefore is not a negative emotion. It's just data, right? It's just information. And jealousy is two things. There's invidious jealousy, which is wanting what someone else has and wanting them not to have it, which I think is actually a pretty rare thing for humans, and usually points to like having felt wronged by that person and, kind of wanting some schadenfreude, some punishment, which is worth looking at. And more commonly, jealousy is a fear of losing what you have. So if envy is wanting what you don't have, jealousy is fear of losing what you do have. And it's interesting to me, like so many of the books I read with my kids or sort of dominant popular culture references, they say jealousy, that's the term they use, when they mean envy. So I'm jealous of that person. I'm like, no, you're not. You just want what they have. That's fine. You can have it too. Many of these things are abundant, right? So it's been interesting. We had this exchange with my kids at the table where I explained, this difference. And my then 4-year-old gave a beautiful example of feeling like, a classmate of hers had a beautiful dress. And she's like, oh, so happy for her. It looked awesome. And also I wanted it. And then my 6-year-old chimes in. She's like, yeah, we should have a word that means compersion and envy. What about compenvy? And so we use compenvy, and compenvious, I think, is actually like almost the most common human emotion in relational space, where it's like, I remember when I met you, Bella, somewhere early on, I think someone told me that you were a model or had been a model. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And for me, that made you less approachable. Like knowing that about you, I was like, okay, she's a model, like somehow other over there. Like, I don't really know any models. I don't hang out with them. I'm sure she's a lovely person and you always seemed nice and passing, but like it made that piece of information made it less likely for me to approach you or engage you in conversation because it felt like something other over there.
And by the way, it's not true.
It's all a lie. Well, there you go, right?
I've had a modeling experience, but so that's funny.
We'll get to that another time. No, so it's just interesting. Like, I think we tell stories about people, and I think something about female desire. I think the common thing that evokes in people is envy. For men who have never been in touch with their own true desire or had a right, to sort of pursue it. And for women who've been punished for it throughout history, to see someone else kind of owning their own desire is really, it evokes a lot of things. And my sense is if we're honest with ourselves, it evokes envy. Like we want that for ourselves, but it's super hard to go after it and we get punished and there's like legitimate fear there. So yeah, I think one of the questions that I hold across all of my work that I think is really interesting in the context of sexuality is when you feel envy, can you hear that as an invitation? Can you say, oh God, I want to move through the world the way they do, the way she does. Like, look how in touch she is with her own sexuality. I want that for myself, right? Like, I want you to not have it. Like, that sucks. That doesn't do
Yeah.
anything for me.
You
But
know,
it's
yeah, that sorry, Sarah, that makes me think of something that I had to deal with a lot, which is jealousy. Beginning of, just it's so funny because there was no at this phase there was no like open relationship at all. It was like really about I was dealing with being married to someone that's from a different culture, and I was living in that different culture, and my ex was like always surrounded with his girlfriends. He was like one of the like really he is like really like someone who that women just love. Like he's very kind and I found myself really, really jealous because I had no idea what they're talking about and like, and all these like inside jokes. And it's funny, right? Because this also relates to the conversation in the sense that, who says that sexuality is more serious, quote unquote, than having an intimate connection with someone, a friendship, right? To me, that was way more like dangerous and grounds than if he had a one night stand, for example, right? So, like have this like deep conversation with his friend, and I remember just like that horrible feeling of jealousy, right? That I had never experienced before because I don't consider myself a jealous person at all. And for some reason, I had this conversation with by the way, she's my grandma who is now she's 90, almost 94, and she gave me the most amazing advice, which is like she said, jealousy is like you just have to teach yourself that it's not really what you think it is. And then I started reading a lot more about it, and it's on the one side of the coin, it's jealousy, but on the other side, it's really like how you interpret the sensations that you have in your body could be interpreted as something else. So what if I started interpreting this sensation that I called jealousy as, oh, my husband is attractive and other women love him, and that doesn't mean that he's gonna abandon me. That's not my core wound, but that he always chooses me despite having these women liking him. You know what I mean? Like that's and that it took me a while, but being able to reframe that and look at that in that way actually that was such a big deal breaker for me. And then I realized how often and then I heard the same story about like fear. And so I don't remember who was it on a podcast sharing that his, like fear doesn't really exist, and it only exists because we label it that way. And it was like he was sharing a story of how like when he was 5, the first time he was going on a roller coaster. I really don't remember and his mom was like, oh, don't get scared, it'll be okay. And he's like, I was actually not scared, I was really excited, but because she said that, I started associating this excitement to fear.
Right.
And I think a lot of us we just wish, and again it goes back to our disconnect from the body. We are so disconnected from our body that we immediately label it as any discomfort as like jealousy or whatever, like, and we just don't even give ourselves the time to like delve in and see like what it means and open up to it and connect to that and share it with our partners and explore that and see if it takes us somewhere to the other side of the bridge.
Totally. Yeah, I'd say one of my deepest pieces of work that I'm in right now that feels like very counter patriarchal is actually feeling my feelings, which feels both like super silly and obvious to say and like so incredibly hard. So I think I got, the last decade or so with more intentional work, I've gotten pretty decent at intellectualizing my feelings, like naming them and saying, oh, this is a thing I'm feeling, which is a nice step, just labeling it. But actually feeling it is a whole nother step. And then give myself permission to actually, be with the experience. And I think the sequencing, is hard. Like it actually has to start in the body. Like I feel tension in my jaw. Like I feel like a little constriction in my chest. And then to your point, you attach meaning to that. Oh, I'm feeling tense or anxious or whatever. And then your brain gets involved. Okay, why? Like, where's that coming from? And I think for me, just to actually allow myself to have my own emotional experience feels really radical, especially in relationship where my partners, they're like, oh shit, like this strong, invulnerable person is having this emotional experience. Like I need to like, stop the presses. Like what's going on here? And so it's actually been a really big piece of relational work to say, hey, can you please allow me to have some space to feel my feelings? And can you just relax? Like I don't need anything from you. I just need some space. And, in heterosexual relationships across the male-female divide, at least I can speak from my experience, like that's really hard. Women are not socialized to support male vulnerability or expression of emotion. So it takes a lot of work on my part to like create the space for myself and, invite my partner or ask my partner to give me that space is challenging. And I think, this is, I'll make a little plug here for men's work, for people socialized men or identify as male-bodied. There's something very liberating about being in a space with only other men because we get it. Like we understand what it's like, and to not have to, I think I underestimated the first time I went into a men's group, the amount of like guarding I do about how women are going to read me or feeling a need to attend to the emotional experience of women in the presence of male vulnerability. And the first time I was in a space where I was sharing kind of things that felt vulnerable to me with other men, I was like, wow, this is so relaxing. Like hard in its own way, don't get me wrong, but also like, so there's something powerful there that, continues to feel.
Yeah, someone that's watching us, my friend AK, she said that something really connected to this. She said that in work and in life, as long as there is a priority to allow people to be safe, vulnerable, that will build trust, and then communication will flow and rest will fall into place. And I completely agree. I'm so tired of having to always like, it's like you always have to pretend to be someone, or you have to be having these like conversations that are somehow appropriate to the certain. What if we just radically were having real conversations with everyone and in every space and place? I mean, that's very radical, but I think just having more of realness, and just sharing what you feel like, and not just saying it. How are you doing? I'm doing fine. Like. But we are at the hour, and we don't have to end now. I think we'll need a few more minutes to complete this conversation, but I just want to be respectful. Like if someone has to leave, I just want to thank everyone that's been here. But it's a really amazing conversation to have, but it's also difficult because there's so much to say and there's like little time, and it's like you want to really share what really matters. Well, what I also want to, I don't want to leave this component out because I think it's really important, which is this: how does this for you tie into parenting? For me, at first it was really associated with a lot of like shame and guilt and oh my God, and what is, like, I'm a mother, like what will people think and what will my child think? Like, anyways, this is a lot of baggage associated to that, but eventually, through this journey of self-discovery and really honoring what's my truth and what feels right for me, I've realized that it's the complete opposite, that by allowing myself to follow what feels right and true, I'm allowing her to do the same. I'm allowing my daughter to do the same. And I might not be right. I might be making a lot of mistakes. I'm not claiming to be, walking the right path always, but I'm walking my path. And I would never want her to follow a different path, a path that doesn't feel right for her. And just to, share a funny story, when she was 4, and, we never, like you guys discussed something, like I would never share anything with my daughter. She would never hear any conversations about any of this. And she comes out of kindergarten and she's like, can I marry my friend? It's a girl, like a girl's name. She's like, can I marry my friend, whatever? And I was like, sure, it's a little too early to think about marriage, but and I had to really like filter myself to like not make any reactions about like the fact that and then she's like, oh, and then she got really comfortable after that. I could see that she's like, oh, thank goodness, Luna was her name. And then we're also going to marry this other guy, right? So we can have children. And I was like, I didn't even know that you need, like, it was amazing. And I was like, and it made me think about the fact that when we're born, we don't have any of these limitations as to how our relationships have to be and how the models need to be. And it's like, with our reactions, we end up filtering, right? And it's like saying like, oh, no, that you can't do. Oh, and that eventually establishes the only right way to go through life. And if it doesn't resonate with you, then you're torn, because you're. And what's also really important, I think, is that it's just so, yeah. It just feels like there's so much room for this. It's like we're going through a phase in our society where just unfortunately everything seems not to be working, from education models to to governance to your relationship models, everything. And
Sorry, kids.
it's the truth. And unfortunately, we don't have, as a society, we still don't have any answers. But guess what? If we have to start somewhere, and that somewhere is exactly in the inquiry to say like, wait, this isn't working, and this doesn't seem to be the perfect model. Maybe it's not the only model, and maybe we should loosen up and allow for that exploration to happen, to find that maybe there is something more fulfilling. And I think our children need to be given that blank slate. That's what I really feel passionate about. It's like giving her a blank slate without marring it with like my opinions, because I don't know the right answers. And hopefully she can figure out. I don't know what your experience is with that.
Yeah, it's a juicy and like very visceral question that we could spend a lot of time on. I guess I'll say a couple things. One is they're inseparable. Like my embrace of polyamory and my commitment to living an embodied erotic life is directly related to how I parent and how I want my children to live and be in the world. And I'll say for me, the directionality actually goes the other way. Like my kids are so effortlessly embodied, so deeply in touch with their emotions, so intuitively sensitive and open and vulnerable and expressive, and like until our society beats it out of them, and my job as a parent is to do my best I can to preserve that essence and withstand and build resilience to the pressures that tell them to be other than who they are. And so for me, I actually draw a lot of courage when I think about the life I want my children to lead, who I want them to be, freedom to have the kind of sex they want to have at an appropriate age, be in the kind of relationships they want to be in. Like, it is super clear and very unambiguous. I want them to act from agency and choice. I want them to not feel coerced. I want them to have agency over their own desire. I want them to pursue pleasure. I want them to be considerate and thoughtful and interdependent and consensual. And that's super easy. It's actually not hard. Doing that myself, no, that's hard. Actually acting from that set of values in my own life is incredibly difficult. But the values that I hold and the behavior that has to flow from that value set is super clear. The doing it is more challenging. So it's funny to me that people always ask, like, one of the questions that comes up, and when I disclose that I'm polyamorous, have an open marriage, is people like, oh, what about the kids? And it's interesting to me that I live in this very like kind of hippie liberal community, a very gay community here in Southern Oregon, and people are totally down if you want to be like non-binary or gender bending. It's all good. No one asks what about the kids, at least in this little progressive bubble here. You're gay, it's fine. Lesbian couple at school, it's all good. You say you're non-monogamous, you're like, whoa, what about the kids? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I think I don't mean to be flip about it, because I think it's a real question that's coming from a place of not yet being exposed or having thought through this stuff. And we're farther along, thank God, on gender and on sexuality, gay and straight and everything in between. We're just not there yet on non-monogamy. And I think the thing I say to people, which resonates when they think about it, is like, for kids, this makes perfect sense. Like they already love multiple people. They love their mom and their dad. They don't really understand what sex is. They don't, sexual connection doesn't totally matter to them. And indeed, it's not actually a core feature, or need not be, of polyamory. It is if you want it to be or not. You can be asexual and polyamorous. That's fine. And so it's really about the ability and freedom to love multiple people concurrently, which for kids is obvious. Like they already do. So to them, until we tell them otherwise, there is no normal, right? And monogamy, if you try to explain it, if you think about it, is actually profoundly weird. It can work. It can be a lovely relational model. But from a sense-making standpoint to a 5-year-old, the idea that you'd have to choose one person that you can only be with the rest of your life is a little odd. So I think to them, it makes really deep intuitive sense. And, I told one of my kids about it and she goes, yeah, she references this kid at school. There's these 2 twins. And she goes, oh yeah, one of them only has one crush. The other has crushes on like 20 girls. He's probably polyamorous. I'm like, yeah, it starts early. Like some people are more monogamously inclined. Others are more, polyamorously inclined, and they're both lovely, right? They're both perfectly lovely ways to relate. Right, a lot more to say about parenting and connections, but I think for me, the core piece of it is if I think about how I want my children to be and to live and to approach their relational and erotic lives at age 25, I know exactly what I want for them. The freedom to choose, the ability to be in their bodies, to have the kind of sexual connections they want. And I know the skills they need to have to get there. And I'm way behind, like I'm catching up as a 41-year-old in order that I can do a better job of supporting them and developing those skills.
Yeah, it's so amazing. When I do work with my clients, half of the work that we do, we wouldn't have to do it if we were allowed to grow up in the natural ways that we were meant to. It's like even from things, like I work a lot with like people like eating habits, for example, right? Just like, oh, don't make a mess, don't touch this, and don't, and then you really disallow your kids to experience all the colors and smells and the textures, right? And that's and then I have to like reteach people to do that because they weren't allowed to do that as kids. So I truly believe that, yeah, this is all about allowing for them to have the options and picking what resonates with them best. And I think a really important issue, like a key issue for me, is also that I found that, I don't know if you've had this, but it's like growing up, it's like we only have one model for how, normally back in the day, it's like how men and women, how a loving relationship is like. And then if you have, most of our parents, they grew up in, with a lot of trauma and with a lot of like, and so there's a lot of dysfunctionality there. So if you grew up with those two being your models for how men and women should be and how a loving relationship should be, in a way you're screwed because
Yeah, totally.
there aren't any other models. And I think like the more, I've been thinking about parenting, not even about relationships, but like in parenting, like I would love to be in a community where, I had like different men helping my daughter see how to be a man, and other different women being a woman, and like different couples relating in different ways for her to see like what is the range for her to choose from. And unfortunately, we live in these like nuclear units and like closed doors, and we like this, and we think that the world has to be like that, and this is not.
Don't get me started on the disaster of the nuclear family for sure. Yeah. No, the appeal of like a village and just having more loving adults in your life is like such a gift. Like I feel so grateful for my sister, who's like a wonderful auntie to my kids. And it's like, why wouldn't you want more loving adults around, regardless of whether or not those people have a sexual connection to anybody else? Who cares? Like, why is that a thing you want to, center on? Right. So yeah, there's lots of places to go with this conversation. I guess I wonder, I know we're kind of easing towards close here.
Yeah.
And before we do a closing invitation to folks, I would love if you're open to, maybe you can share 2 things. One is what feels at this moment, like I know you and I are almost the same age. We share very close birthdays. At this moment in your life at 40 and a half, What feels most like exciting and joyful about the journey you're on? And then what feels hardest at present? Like what's the work that's still really stuck in you?
About in relation to our topic.
Yeah, in this journey.
Yeah.
It's all easy. I'll be envious.
Very easy question to go. Um, what feels really just right, and like I finally broken away from this guilt and shame and all these
Mhm.
like judgments around what should be and what shouldn't be. So I think from that perspective, I feel like I've accomplished so much just by really saying no to something that doesn't work for me, right?
Mm.
and and accepting that my body and my body wisdom and my consciousness and my spirit, whatever it's like they know best.
Mm.
Really following that. So from that perspective, I feel very confident to say that this is, and I'm very. It's almost like a religion for me that I really honor that, and I really
Mm.
honor like every step that I take is comes from that place. It's like either it's a full yes, or if it's a no, it's a no. And I think that what you said about kids is really important also. Is like when we teach them to really follow that, like they know when to draw the lines and say no, and they also know when to say yes and experience pleasure in whatever aspect of their life. So for me, like that, and I also felt like I've been able to pass that to Luli, to my daughter.
Mm.
I took her to school and she didn't speak any English like the first grade, and she was like, I was so worried about her and whatever, and like I would keep going to the teacher and asking her if she's okay. And after 2 months she was like, I have never seen a child so comfortable in asking for what they need, and just
Aw.
oh my god, I just cried. I was like, oh my god, if I was able to accomplish that, like that's
Doing something right.
I did something right. And so that to me is a huge accomplishment. Now if you ask me, my biggest
Can
challenge
you
is
just can you just let that one land? I just want to honor that. That's awesome, Bella. Like that's a huge. That whole thing you just said is really quite something. I'm compendious.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is really what my life is about now, and it's really hard sometimes because not everyone understands and they label it as selfish and hedonistic and whatever labels but this is
Yeah.
an authentic journey that I can follow, and I'm really committed to it. So it is what it is. And the challenge, of course, is there, right? Like there's still lot of judgment, and not even as much the judgment, it's misperception of
Mm-hmm.
what
Feel unseen.
not just open relationships, but just living from your heart and living from this place of like what I desire
In a
is what.
society that doesn't.
Yeah, like
Yeah, totally.
what I please, and that doesn't sit well with everyone. And so just really honoring that and not allowing the judgment of others to become my own judgment, because it's really easy to fall back into that. Oh, thanks for bringing the
Yeah.
giraffe.
Your heart center back.
Yeah, exactly the same one. It's just a little smaller, but it's I love it. But also the difficult part for me, and it's not difficult, I'm in a kind of an in-between phase where I really don't know what the right gradation of open relationships I'm aiming for, or if I want to go back to a like strictly monogamous. Like I don't really know, and but it feels also okay because through this whole exploration, I've come to the point where I know the what are they called? Like the ingredients of what makes me happy and
Mm.
for a good relationship, and I know things that don't. And I really don't find these fitting into under any definition yet. So I have to kind of, I'm faced with the choice of like, I need to create a new type of relationship altogether for me. So
Mm.
it's
I'm counting on you.
it's a creative
No
process.
pressure.
What about you? Same question back at you.
Yeah. Mm. I feel the joy is I feel the most integrated and authentic in my body and in the way I relate that I ever have in my life. And that feels just really awesome. I feel able to be, you said earlier that you felt like sometimes you were too much or told to tone it down. Like I felt that way my whole life. Like I'm too much, too big, too loud, too whatever. And I'm finally giving myself, sort of returning to myself, belonging to myself, integrating those pieces of myself. Like, yes, I'm big, get a big brain, heart, big body, like big erotic self. And that's me. And like, it's great. It's all good. And so returning to myself and then allowing that self to be seen by others and having that self, that more integrated, full, connected, embodied self, be not just seen, but welcomed and appreciated. Of course, not by everyone. I still get all the slings and arrows that we all get. But by some and by people who love me feels truly amazing. And almost like I do this somatic exercise, like, feeling the body with one of my therapists. And when she like guides me through like feeling held and supported in this new me, like I always like almost like cry laugh, like this relief, the sense of like giddiness of like, oh, I can just be me, and that person can be loved and can love in the way that feels natural to me. So it's hard to overstate how significant and powerful that feels. And yeah, like you said earlier, like it just emanates through all of my life. Like people feel me differently. I show up differently with my children, and like I'm just more integrated. That feels awesome. Hard. Yeah, without question, the most challenging thing is like trying to find a way to be me and in relationship, in those relationships that matter most to me, and in particular my marriage. And even like this conversation and my desire to speak more publicly about this as an expression of like who I am and my political commitments to destigmatizing the erotic, destigmatizing the right to pleasure, destigmatizing non-monogamy, destigmatizing the freedom to choose and be in the kind of relationships you want to be in, and prioritize your sexual connection as a value, not more or less important than intellectual connection or emotional connection, but just alongside it as something that's fundamental to being human. And my life partner is more private, and that's also beautiful, right? Like that's totally perfect. And so how do we navigate interdependence remains just really challenging. And to our great credit, I think we're getting a lot of support and building the skills that we need, that I would argue everyone needs, no matter what kind of relationship you want to be in, platonic, familial, or romantic or otherwise. But navigating that inside of a structure that has changed, right? We started as a monogamous couple and have moved to non-monogamy is a challenge. And that remains good, hard, ongoing work.
Yeah, and that leads us to, thanks for sharing. That leads us to, I think our conclusion, which I think there's no conclusion, right? It's really our invitation and our only kind of reason for being here is to share our stories, to be vulnerable and open. Again, as an invitation to those of you that might feel the same and might be either embarking on a journey like this or are already on a journey like that, or again, I think the more we know about what's out there, what's possible, the more empowered we are to pursue what feels right and pursue our happiness. And it's not an easy journey. It's sometimes people label it as like, oh, this is like the easy way out to just sleep with a lot of people. Like that's as the easiest thing would be then to just become single and be in a normal society. I think this is what people do, and there's just especially where I'm in Miami, there's it's like a very not a very conscious way of relating. On the contrary, I think the journey into open relationships, the right way of doing it is very conscious, as it's very, there's a lot of it's not a frivolous thing, right? You just really have to consider everyone and be in open conversation with everyone, and you have to be really connected to yourself and connected to others. And it's each step of the way is a challenge, and at the same time has huge rewards. So it's not for everyone. It's also, there's a lot still to explore and to learn. And so we really encourage those of you that are interested in the subject to really go beyond and read and listen. And we can, if you agree, Brian, like we can share some of the lists of the books that we've read, or some of the, of the impactful podcasts that maybe you've listened to. There are no right answers, right? The whole point is if you listen to yourself, you will start creating your own type of relational models. And there's some guidelines, there are some tools, but it's almost like there's no way for you to have an answer. If that's what you're seeking for, there's no such thing, right? I think it's like in monogamy, it's almost like this one type of model. When you get out of that, it's like you start creating your own thing, because there isn't really. I don't know if you agree with me, but and at the same time, the invitation here is for, please share with us what resonates, what doesn't resonate. We would love to have more conversations to kind of go more deeply into a certain topic of, how certain things work, kind of the more practical aspects of this, if you're considering this. And also like what's under the umbrella of open relationships, because it's a whole range of things that are that we could talk about. So we would love your comments about what would be interesting for future conversations. Yeah, what do you think, Brian? Is that something that we would you like to have more conversations? I'm just kind of on your part to invite you.
Yeah, I think I want to echo and extend the invitation that you said it's not for everyone. And I guess I want to quibble a little bit. I think it is for everyone. Like intentional, conscious relationships is fundamentally important to lead a life where you can belong and be community, which I think is what everyone longs for. I think what's not for everyone is committing to that work is hard. And so, some people may choose not to. And that is an understandable choice given wherever you are in life. And ultimately, I do want to invite people to really approach the relationships with intentionality and care. So the two concrete tools I can offer that I've found like incredibly helpful, that are useful no matter where you are in your sexual, erotic, intimate, relational, open or non or monogamous journey. One is this tool called the Relationship Smorgasbord, which we can share following the conversation. But what it does is it's a way to invite intentionality in how you form your relationships off the escalators. The relationship escalator is like you date, you become monogamous, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, you do the things. And that may work. And if that's what works for you, wonderful, do it. But the invitation is to be conscious about those choices and say, like, do you want to live with someone? Do you want to share a bed? Do you want what types of intimacy do you want? Do you want to mingle finances? Do you want to raise kids together? These are all questions that are useful to ask in any relationship you're in, including like with your parents. Do you want to share finances? Do you want to have caregiving responsibilities?
Right.
These are conversations that are really important to have and to take a perspective on. So that's one tool I recommend. And the second one, more in kind of the realm of the erotic or in physical intimacy, is the 3-minute game. So I mentioned earlier The Wheel of Consent by Betty Martin. And she came up with this concept for this game called the 3-minute game, which is a game of exploring touch. And it invites you over the course of 12 minutes, 3 minutes for each quadrant, to practice the skills of giving, receiving, taking, and allowing. And it's a radical exercise to actually lean into. And I found it incredibly helpful for me personally, and finding my edges, illuminating the work I still have to do, and then doing that work and doing it in relationship. Because I think, it's great to take this on your own and have agency over that. And ultimately, we're relational beings, and this stuff requires work and help and partnership with people that we love.
Thank you, Brian. I really, 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 really appreciate you being here and sharing both your story, the wisdom that you've acquired by going on this journey, and some of the tools that you find helpful and hopefully will help others. And I really, oh, you know what? Let's see very quickly. Do we have questions? There seems to be someone asking if they can ask a question. Yeah, you can ask questions, please. You have five more minutes?
Let's give it 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. I guess we can also answer some of these questions. Oh yeah, the question is: intentional conscious relationship is for everyone. Oh yeah, it's a comment. Yes.
Here.
Absolutely. So I think we have to end because it's been an hour and a half, but the conversation flew really fast because it is a really, really important conversation that I'm so happy that we're having here, and it's a very packed conversation. There's so much more to unpack. If we were to stay here for hours, it would so, there's a lot of detail knowledge, practical tools, and things that we could share with you. But more than anything, I just want to thank everyone for being open to listen to our stories, to be open to ask questions, to inquire about what makes you happy, what makes others happy, and to question whether some of the things that we're told or have to be a certain way really have to be a certain way or not. I think, like I said, we are in a process of reconstructing our societies, reconstructing our relationships, and really looking a much deeper look at what truly makes us have this freedom that we're told we have. Like, how do we really take advantage of what is freedom, right? And what makes us really happy? These questions are the most difficult ones to answer. And I invite you to really delve deep into your body to ask these questions. Don't try to answer these in your mind, because a lot of times our mind is very polluted with all the norms and rules, and it's much easier when you're able to connect to the wisdom of your body in the present moment, which is kind of one of the things. And with that, I want to, again, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks, Brian, for being here, and have a beautiful, beautiful, contemplation.
Before you do the final goodbye,
I think with this, I just want to really invite people to contemplate what feels right, what doesn't feel right, throw away what didn't feel right, and take in what resonated. And again, really, really appreciative of having had the opportunity to have this conversation with all of you.
I want to give you back the last word, but I also wanted to say thank you for holding the space and for inviting me into it. I really enjoyed it. It's fun to have a chance to reconnect 15 years after being in the belly of the neoliberal beast in Washington, D.C., to connect across the country and have this conversation. Just feels really enlivening and brings me hope that we're out here doing this, and hopefully folks are holding their own inquiries and contributing to building a world that's more aligned with what we want.
Absolutely. Hope, actually, it's funny, we started with that intention, and I think I'm coming out with a lot of hope and a lot of openness, and believing that this is just one of many conversations we will have, and hopefully we can even build a community around this. And this is all about taking that first step and inquiring into what makes us truly happy and what really makes us authentically who we are. So thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Lots of love.
Bye to the folks out there in the world.
Bye-bye.